Are you doing IVF and have no idea what they're talking about when they tell you what your embryo looks like? Let's talk about embryo grading today. I'm Dr. Jessica Rennick, a double board certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinology and infertility specialist, and I am going to talk about embryo grading. I'm specifically going to be talking about the Gardner embryology grading system, and that has three main points: how expanded the embryo is, which ranked 1 to 6, the quality of the inner cell mass, which is ranked A, B, or C, and the quality of the trophectoderm or outer cell mass, which is also ranked A, B, or C. So the first thing that's important to know is the embryology timeline. And when we're talking about the Gardner embryology grading system, we're typically looking at the blastocyst, and that is found on day 5, 6, and 7. On the day of the egg retrieval, you'll know how many eggs and how many of those eggs are mature, and that is where fertilization is going to occur. On day 1, your lab should be checking to see if the eggs fertilized normally. Day 3 typically is another point for checking the embryos. At this point, they're typically 4 to 10 cells, and then they look on day 5, 6, and 7 potentially to see if there is a blastocyst. And this is where the Gardner grading system comes in. So as I said, there's three main pieces to the Gardner grading. There is how expanded the embryo is, there is the inner cell mass grading, and there is the trophectoderm or outer cell grading. So we'll start with how expanded the embryo is, because that's the first piece, the number piece. And you can see here it goes from 1 to 6, with a grade 1 being an early blastocyst, a grade 2 where the blastocele, which is the fluid here inside the embryo, being more than half of the volume of the embryo, a stage 2 or 3 where the blastocele, or that fluid part, completely fills the cavity, but you still can't really tell the difference between the inner cells and the outer cells. And then stage 3 is where it starts to be a full blastocyst. So you can really clearly see here, inner cell mass, fluid here, and then the outer cells. At stage 4, this is an expanded blastocyst, really very clear here. A lot of fluid here in the middle with these outer cells arranged really nicely, and the inner cell mass right there. Stage 5 is when it starts to hatch, and stage 6 is when it has completely hatched from the zona pellucida. First of the letter grades is this inner cell mass. The inner cell mass is what's going to become the baby. And as I said, it was A, B, or C, and it's based on how organized the cells in that area are. And so A would be the best, where they're tightly packed and there's many cells. B would be with them very loosely packed, only a few cells, and then C would be a poor quality embryo with very few cells visualized. The trophectoderm, which is the outer cells that become the placenta, is graded in a similar way. So A would be many cells forming a cohesive epithelium. You see here there's no breaks in the cell layer here. B would be few cells forming a loose epithelium, and then C is a poor quality embryo with very few cells noted. So this kind of puts it all together and summarizes the various levels of quality. You can see when they're 3 to 6, you can fully grade them when they're 1 and 2, because you can't really distinguish the inner cell mass from the outer cell mass. You can only just really call them an early blast. I also added a morula, which is kind of the stage before a blastocyst, because sometimes you'll see that as well. This is one way you might think about the quality of the embryo in relation to the grade, and keep in mind that while I've drawn these circles, it's definitely not as strict as that. Different labs may also kind of apply the grading in different ways, so there might be variation a little bit in what is considered quality in a different lab, but in general, those in the green circle, those are kind of considered the best quality embryos. In the yellow circle, those are considered good to average quality embryos. In the orange circle there, those are generally considered poorer quality embryos, and sometimes those will be transferred fresh, but maybe not considered for biopsy or freezing if that's your plan. And in general, the red quality embryos are very poor and often not transferred, biopsied, or froze. Again, that can differ by lab, but this is kind of like a general overall look at what the grade means for quality. Keep in mind also that this is not the only way we look and think about embryos. There's also a difference between day 5, 6, and 7 embryos, and then also if you do genetic testing, whether an embryo is euploid or aneuploid, genetically correct or genetically incorrect. But this is just kind of a general on the morphologic grading systems.